And so there's a reason, there's actually a connection why we don't talk about these things and why we don't know how to talk about any of these things. And my father, who is Navajo and grew up on and around our reservation for all of his life, he taught in our public schools, he's pastored churches on our reservation. And several years ago, he was in a committee meeting for a creation justice committee for our denomination, the Christian Reformed Church. And they were looking at issues of creation justice and global warming and trying to have a dialogue about how our church was what needed to be better stewards in this dialogue. And my father said to the committee members around him, they said, well, the reason this nation, the reason you, to the dominant culture people in this committee, the reason you don't know how to care for creation is because you have a doctrine of discovery. And his committee looked at him and said, what do you mean by that? And he said, Google it, look it up. And so they searched it. They had a lawyer in the room, they had several theologians in the room, and they searched the doctrine of discovery, and it absolutely blew the minds of everybody in the room, and it completely disrupted the way they were going with the conversation, and ended up actually having a deep influence on some of the final recommendations of this committee. But if anyone who here has heard of the doctrine of discovery? So a few of you have. So I want to go through and give you a history of this doctrine. So in 1452, Pope Nicholas V wrote this papal bull, or Edict of the Catholic Church. In this, he said, invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens and pagans whatsoever. Reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and convert them to his and their use and profit. This papal bull, written in 1452, along with others written between 1452 and 1493, collectively became known as what is called the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery is essentially the church in Europe saying to the nations of Europe, wherever you go, whatever lands you find not ruled by Christian rulers, those people are less than human, and the land is yours for the taking. This was literally the doctrine that allowed European nations to go into Africa, colonize the continent, and enslave the African people. They weren't fully human. This was also the doctrine that let Columbus, who was lost at sea, landed in a new world already inhabited by millions and claimed to have discovered it. If you think about it, you cannot discover lands that are already inhabited. That process is known as stealing, conquering, colonizing. Because to this day we refer to what Columbus did as discovery. In fact, there is a statue of Christopher Columbus right up the street here. Because to this day we refer to what Columbus did as discovery, reveals the implicit racial bias of our nation, which is native peoples are not fully human. This, of course, makes the doctrine of discovery a systemically racist doctrine. In 1763, King George drew a line down the Appalachian Mountains, and he said to the colonies that they no longer had the right of discovery of all the empty Indian lands west of Appalachia. This upset the colonists. So a few years later, they wrote a letter of protest. In their letter, they accused the king of raising the conditions of new appropriations of land. They went on in their letter to state that he has excited domestic insurrection. Our founding fathers used the term all men. It's because they had a very narrow definition of who was and who was not human. This, of course, makes our Declaration of Independence a racist document that assumes the dehumanization of people of color. A few years later, our founding fathers wrote another document, naming this document with the words, "We the people." This, of course, is the preamble to the Constitution. Now, Article 1, Section 2, just a few lines below this preamble, is the section that defines who is and who is not included or protected by the Constitution in this union. It's important to note that women are never mentioned. Natives are specifically excluded, and African Americans are counted as 3/5 of a person. So clearly, we the people literally means white landowning men. The authority to determine who is and who is not human. In 1823, there was a Supreme Court case, Johnson versus McIntosh. Two men of European descent are litigating over a single piece of land. One of them got the land from a native tribe, the other got the land from the government. They want to know who owned it. The case goes all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court had to decide the principle upon which land titles were based. They decided the principle was discovery that gave title to the government by whose subject or by whose authority was made. Discovery became the foundation, the legal foundation for land titles. And they went on to state that based on the doctrine of discovery, natives who were here first, but are less than human, only have the right of occupancy to land, like a fish occupies water or a bird occupies air, while Europeans have the right of discovery to the land, and therefore the true title to it. This precedent and the doctrine of discovery were referenced by the Supreme Court as recently as 2005. This, of course, makes the United States Supreme Court a racist court that has legal precedent literally based on the dehumanization of people of color. 1630, John Winthrop preached, initially the Protestant church pushed back against the doctrine of discovery. This was a Catholic doctrine. 1630, John Winthrop was in Boston Harbor, and he preached a sermon called a Model of Christian Charity. In this sermon, he referred to the colonists as a city on a hill, borrowing from the teachings of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, to be a city on a hill or a lamp on a stand, shining their good works into this dark world. He went on in the sermon to exhort them in all meekness, gentleness, patience, and liberality, to rejoice together, mourn together, labor, and suffer together, to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bonds of peace. At the end of the sermon, he began quoting Deuteronomy chapter 30. This is the passage from the Old Testament of the Bible, where the people of Israel are at the banks of the Jordan River, about ready to cross over it and take possession of the filled with people of color. As they're standing there, Moses is reiterating the threats and promises of the land covenant of God of Israel. Citizens united will make a statement of this to you if you disobey God counted these things to you. At the end of that passage, it says that the heart shall turn in regards to so that we will not obey or worship other gods. We shall surely perish out of the good land of those we pass over. Now, Deuteronomy 30 says river, but John Winthrop said that. Wait, did he correct that? Well, why does he say that? Years later, 1868, we passed the House Amendment. This amendment extended the right of citizenship to a city on this continent under the jurisdiction based on the expectations of Jesus to be a city on the hill, based on the model of Old Testament Israel. They are standing on the shores of their promised natives the right to go out and take possession in 1924. And even though if you ever read about Joshua in the Old Testament revival, you will know that God's command to them extended some of the rights of citizens like even former male slaves. It still excluded these huge promised lands for one group of people. And we forget that in 1973, the same amendment was used in Roe v. Wade, which now called that sermon when babies aren't conceptual, and therefore they can be aborted. What this demonstrates is that the heart of the Constitution is not a value from the 1700s we begin, but a past especially humanization past the Mississippi River, moving into states like Illinois and so on and so forth. As that's happening, the Second Great Awakening begins taking place. There's this renewal of religious denominations, there's this renewal of churches, there's this religious fervor as settlers are moving further and further west. And in the early 1800s, the term manifest destiny is born. This notion that this nation had the God-ordained right to rule this continent from sea to shining sea. I want to look at a little bit of our history. Excuse me, about a year ago, I had to write a paper for a journal, and it was on the doctrine of discovery in war. And what I did is I took our nation's history from 1775 to 2016. Every year in blue is a year that I found we were either in a declared state of war or armed military conflict against another nation or entity. Every year in red is a year we were fighting against native tribes. If you look at the first 2/3 of our history, we were almost in a constant state of battle against native tribes and peoples. Below is a list of wars that we fought in the 19th century against native peoples. Now we refer to the 19th century as our century of expansion. This is the century we added 30 new states to the Union. But clearly it wasn't a century of expansion. This was a century of ethnic cleansing and genocide. As our nation fulfilled its manifest destiny and marched further and further west across the continent. In 1830, our Congress passed the Indian Removal Act. This was the act of Congress that gave the military, in practice, they could by force remove nations, tribes from their lands in the east to empty lands further in the west. This directly resulted in the Trail of Tears for the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Cherokee, the Creek. This resulted in the Long Walk for the Navajo. All told, about a dozen tribes experienced forced relocations because of this act, and tens of thousands of people died as a direct result of this act. In 1862, we had the largest mass execution in the history of our nation. The day after Christmas, 1862, 38 native warriors were hung, sentenced to death and hung after mock military trials that lasted just a few minutes. Because these were military trials, they had to be signed off by the president. And so Abraham Lincoln ordered the execution of the largest mass execution in the history of our country. In 1864, we had the Sand Creek Massacre. We had about 150, 200 Cheyenne and Arapaho men, women, and children. They were encamped over a hillside waving a white flag of surrender and an American flag to show they were there peacefully. A U.S. Army, led by a Methodist pastor, came over the hillside, and he ordered them all slaughtered. Later, there were reports that their genitalia were paraded down the streets of Denver. In 1879, we had the start of the Indian boarding schools. The first one was in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, called the Carlisle Indian School. Native children were taken from their homes. They were forced into these military-style boarding schools, separated from their families, separated from their communities. They were punished for speaking their languages, punished for practicing their culture. Untold stories of abuse, sexual, physical, mental, happened in these boarding schools. The last of these schools, which many of them were run by churches, didn't close until the 1970s and 80s. In 1890, we have the Massacre of Wounded Knee. This is a bit more famous battle. 350 native warriors were killed in a single day of Wounded Knee. We know a little bit more about this battle. What we don't generally talk about is that 20 Congressional Medals of Honor were given to the U.S. soldiers who participated in this massacre. Many people have referred to and look at this massacre as a war crime. And our nation gave 20 Congressional Medals of Honor, and to this day has refused to rescind those medals. On December 19, 2009, Congress passed House Resolution 3326. This was a 2010 Department of Defense Appropriations Act, a 67-page document laying out the appropriations for the DoD for 2010. Page 45, subsection 8113 is titled Apology to Native Peoples of the United States. What follows is the 7-bullet point apology. It mentions no specific tribe, no specific treaty, and no specific injustice. It basically says you have some nice land, our citizens didn't take it very politely, let's just call it all of our land and steward it together. It ended with a disclaimer stating nothing in here is legally binding. To date, this apology has not been announced, read, or publicized by the White House or by Congress. We don't teach American history. We teach them American mythology. We teach the mythology of discovery. We teach the myth that we're founded on equality. We teach expansion, exceptionalism with liberty and justice for all. But we don't recognize that these are all code words. Discovery is a code word for dehumanizing. Equality, our own foundation, to define as only for a very select few. Expansion is a code word for ethnic cleansing. Exceptionalism is a code word for genocide. And our liberty and justice is literally defined in our Constitution and our Supreme Court case rulings as for a very narrow few. What do we do about this? How do we address this? There's an Aboriginal leader out of Canada who says where common memory is lacking, where people do not share in the same past, there can be no real community. If you want to build community, you have to start by creating a common memory. I think this quote gets to the heart of our nation's problem with race. We have a dominant culture that remembers a history of discovery, expansion, opportunity, community of exceptionalism. And we have communities of color with a lived experience of broken treaties, stolen land, slavery, Jim Crow laws, ethnic cleansing, boarding schools, internment camps, mass incarceration. There's no common memory. We have this massive list of history that we don't know how to talk about. In my seminar later today, I'm going to be discussing the impact this history has on our nation. You can see that the impact this has psychologically on our communities of color through what is described by the psychological community as historical trauma. I also hypothesize that you cannot build a nation on 500 years of dehumanizing injustice without traumatizing yourself. So I recognize our dominant culture is also traumatized by what it's standing on and what happened in its history. So we have to learn how to talk about these things. We have to learn how to address these things. And if this is the way, and this is what I want us to grapple with today, if this is the way our nation deals with people, it makes complete sense why we struggle to take care of our environment. If we can treat people this way, then it makes perfect sense why we have such an incredibly difficult time caring for our environment. Thank you for letting me speak to you today.